Disclaimer: this video is of humorous nature only. The author does not seek to insult or humiliate anyone. The video may contain profanity. People under the age of 16 should refrain from watching this video. Story 1. He kept talking about anything. He seemed so enthusiastic about learning and sharing what he learned. To me, it said that he's very smart, but not arrogant about it. I don't consider myself a smart person, but he didn't seem to care. Actually, it was the enthusiasm that piqued my interest. I definitely want to keep talking to him. Story 2. First date with my partner, I told him I had trauma and SAPS and ADHD, etc. He asked, "What does that mean for you?" Instead of judging, asking probing questions, or ignoring it completely, this man asked me how this impacts my life in an effort to genuinely understand me and my mind. Our 6th anniversary is next month. Story 3. Most men hide their sad backstory or any vulnerable parts of themselves, but he opened up about being orphaned and his mother's mental illness and how he manages without support. And 3 hours later, I didn't want to leave the table. His confidence in being honest was so hot. It didn't come across like a sob story. Story 4. I was in the midst of a divorce, living separately. Went through some hard times. A coworker had my number. We work in substance use treatment, so we have to have numbers. I was laying in bed one night, and she asked if I was okay in text. We never really talked at all at work, but I took leave because I was feeling suicidal and needed some time for mental health. I replied, "No, I'm really not." The next day, she replied and said, "Meet me here," and gave me an address to a restaurant in BFE. She asked what was going on. I told her I'm crippled financially, lost my home, and can't afford my dissolution fees, and I feel alone. We went on to eating. I didn't think of it as a date, just a friendly gesture. But goddamn, was she so naturally beautiful? That smile felt like home to me, something I've longed for 26 years. When we finished, we walked outside, and she handed me a piece of paper. It was a check for $400, and she said, "File those papers. Go back to work so I can see you more." And then she gave me a hug, all while saying, "You have my time whenever you need. It'll be okay." Every night after work, we met in a parking lot at an Italian restaurant. She was 36 in a bad situation, so she lived with her mom, and I was living with my mom due to losing my house. We spent almost every night together since, even if it was for an hour. It felt like an eternity, which also didn't feel long enough. We've lived together now for almost a year. Story 5. For our first date, we got coffee and walked around to Barnes & Noble's for a little while. We were browsing some books by the entrance when a bus pulled up and an elderly man with a walker stepped off. I saw him struggling to open the door and took a step to help. My date, whose back was to the entrance, whirled around and bounded over to the door, holding both sets open and helping the man through. We've been together for over 5 years now. Story 7. I had gotten out of a pretty emotionally, mentally controlling, abusive relationship at the time. So needless to say, I had some apprehension putting myself out there, again. The thought of being vulnerable to someone again was scary. We spent maybe 30 minutes to an hour at the restaurant. The remaining 5 hours of our date was spent talking in the car about anything and everything. By the time we both begrudgingly parted ways for the night, we had a breakfast date planned for the next morning, and it felt like I had known this man for years. It was the first time in a long time that I was able to fully relax around a guy, especially on a first date. So it wasn't anything specifically that was said or done. It was just the way we opened up so easily to each other, even about insecurities, past relationships, etc. He just made me feel comfortable. We're coming up on our 1-year anniversary here in a few days. The road hasn't been completely smooth, as the first healthy relationship after an abusive one can be pretty rough when you've learned nothing but toxic coping mechanisms and have to unlearn them. But man, I think this is the first time I can truly say I know what it feels like to be loved by a partner fully. Story 8. We were at his home alone for the first time. His friends called, he was on the phone for a second, then when he hung up he said, I am so sorry, I gotta go. My friends have been drinking and they don't want to drive. I'll go pick them up. I'll drop you off on the way. We've been married 10 years now, and that was the moment I fell in love. It might seem silly, but I was really impressed how he didn't hesitate. Like, of course his friends could count on him. Even when he had the house to himself with his date, he was still thinking, my friends need help. And he is mature and responsible. He worried that they might try to drive while drunk. I thought, this is a reliable man who has his priorities right. And he has proven himself to be exactly that over the years we've been together. Story 9. 2 things. We went axe throwing for our first date, and he thought to bring water and soda to drink while we were enjoying the fun. He went in for the kiss within the first 5 minutes. We had been video chatting and texting for a month already. It felt incredibly natural and gave me butterflies that I still get whenever we kiss. We fell into a rhythm on the first date like we were together for 10 years. Felt like the easiest first date. Completely at ease with each other. We've been together for 3 years now. Got married on our 1-year dating anniversary. Every day is better than the last. It's like Christmas every morning, waking up next to him excited and ready to start the day together. Story 10. Oh, this one is going to be good. I was on a date with a girl I liked, and I got a ping on Discord from the boys asking if I can join online. As I'm typing to explaining, I can't. She grabs my wrist and tells me, "No, wait one moment," then walks out and comes back with a gaming laptop. I knew then and there. 3 years later, we are now happily married. Story 11. We talked for 2 hours straight without interruption, and then she grabbed me and shoved her tongue down my throat right before climbing in an Uber. We talked about it later, and she was wondering, is he really not going to kiss me? I was focused on not being overly aggressive because I really liked her, didn't want to fuck it up, and can't read hints to save my life. So, good move on her part. 1-year anniversary was yesterday. Rings being made. Story 12. Well, this date was actually really bad for the most time. We went to get drinks, 30 mins after we started fighting a bit. Different views on world and politics. It got so bad that people around us was looking at us because we were really loud. He pissed me off so much that for the last 15 min I was dead silent. I asked waiter for a check and he didn't let me pay. I thanked him for the drinks and picked up my things, turned around and walked out. It was pretty late, and I picked this bar for the date BCs. It was relatively close to where I live, and he knew that. I started walking and I heard him shout my name. I stopped. He caught up. I was confused and looked at him with my WTF face. He told me he just can't let me walk alone to my place since it was dark out and that he would be worried. That's when I decided to give him a second chance, and it was a really good decision. Story 13. I had a boyfriend. On our very first date, aside from being a gentleman and remembering I love flowers, he did something I never expected from a guy, let alone first date. At some point after getting coffee, he asked me if I minded going back to his place to pick up more cash. We were both in our early 20s and lived with our parents, but I knew his parents were out of town. I was reluctant to say yes, but I went anyway and told myself I'm calling an Uber if he tried to get me there just to hook up. Well, he got the cash from his room and asked me if he could show me something. I took me by the hand to a wall full of family photos of his parents, brothers, sister, and niece and nephew. I could tell how much they meant to him, and for him to show me that was so touching. It meant he was serious about getting to know each other. Our date ended up lasting 12 hours because neither of us wanted it to end. Even the kiss felt so right, like I was meant to meet him. He became the first guy I truly fell in love with. He passed away while we were together. Extremely rare and extremely fatal. That was like 8 years ago. I used to cry because I miss him. Now I cry because experiencing him was beautiful. Story 14. I met a guy on Match.com. We talked for a bit and finally met in person. Honestly, I was kind of meh on him. He seemed a bit standoffish. We went out to dinner, a restaurant I liked, had a great meal, and then he asked if I wanted to go for ice cream. I was like, sure. So we went to a nearby ice cream shop, had some ice cream, and talked some more. I was still on the fence about him. So We finished our ice cream. It was after 10 p.m. and we were getting ready to head out. He looked at me and said, "I had a really great time tonight and want to see you again. How does 7 p.m. next Saturday sound? I can pick the restaurant this time." I did admire his directness and figured, why not? So I said, yes. We went out the following Saturday and he was like a different person, much more relaxed, chatty, and open. I later found out he was a nervous wreck on our first date because he really liked me and didn't want to mess it up. His words. Well, he didn't mess it up. We've been married almost 20 years now and have 2 great kids. Story 15. A million years ago, my buddy didn't have a car, so I'd drive him out to chill with his GF. Her best friend was usually there, so they always used to try to pair us up. She was cute, but I never really felt anything special until one night. I was like 19 and a huge partier at the time, and she was a lot more reserved, so one day she's like, "Come over with her, buddy. My parents are gone, and we can chill and play Pong," which I was obsessed with. When I got there, she had moved this tiny, like 3x3 table to the center of the room, and it had a black trash bag stretched over it. It was just the 4 of us, and it looked so silly, this tiny table with a trash bag on it. When I busted her balls about it, she said it was her mom's favorite table, so she didn't want to get it ruined. I don't know why, but the fact that she was so outside her comfort zone, yet wanted me to hang out so bad she took a chance looking dumb just to convince me to come over. It got me so bad I fell in love right there. We only lasted 2 years, but it was the first time I'd ever really fallen for someone. Story 16. This was back when DVDs were a thing. During our first date, it came out that she collected old school movies on DVD. She especially loved screwball comedies. Then she started talking about one movie she'd seen recently. She remembered everything except the name of the movie. She described the plot perfectly, mentioned that it starred Cary Grant, Rosalind Russell, and Ralph Bellamy. Eventually, she just threw up her hands and said, "I think it's called The Front Page." It's not. It's called His Girl Friday, a movie based on a stage play called The Front Page. The only way she could possibly make that mistake is if, 1, she truly liked that movie, and 2, cared enough about it to learn something about it after watching it. In other words, she wasn't a hipster. Her fandom was very real. I like screwball comedies too, but I really enjoyed how excited she got when talking about them. You have to be a nerd of 4 or 5 different magnitudes to collect screwball comedy movies on DVD. But she checked those boxes. We're talking a 20-something girl in 2004 who somehow knows who T.F. Cary Grant even was. That's definitely somebody that I wanted another date with. And on the second date, we watched my The Philadelphia Story DVD. Story 17. It was just so romantic, like something in a film. I was in Barcelona on a solo holiday at the time. I was a bit nervous at first when he approached me when I was standing on the street corner looking at my phone. He said he really liked my vibe. We got talking and realized we had a lot in common. Swapped Insta info and arranged to meet up later that evening at a little wine bar in some tucked-away street. I offered to pay for things, but he insisted on covering everything, including my taxi ride back. The conversation flowed. I'm pretty sure it was non-stop, and damn, he was handsome. We got on so well, I'd never had a date like it. All my other first dates had been awkward or uncomfortable. Went back to his hotel, made out in the lift, and then you can guess what happened next. It was honestly the perfect night. I flew back the next day, so we didn't get much time together. We exchanged a few messages, but I deleted Instagram shortly after and kicked myself when I realized I didn't have any other contact info of his. He was from California anyway, and I'm from UK, so it was a one-time thing. But I'd see him again in a heartbeat given the chance. Story 18. He was just so old-fashioned and respectful. It was so refreshing. He was waiting when I arrived. He was attentive and kept the conversation going. He insisted on getting the drinks and dinner. We laughed and the banter was just so easy. To this day, he does things like always dropping me to, picking me up from the airport. If I start a new job, he either drives me to work, picks me up that day, or calls me on my drive in. He holds my hand proudly in public. He opens doors. He carries the shopping or pushes the trolley. He drives us everywhere. He's never once called me a nasty name or risen his voice with me. He's the absolute calm to my storm. He is my biggest cheerleader, always in my corner and telling me I can achieve anything I put my mind to. He's intelligent, driven, and successful. He's very traditionally masculine and treats me very feminine. Working in mining construction, I'm used to being one of the boys at work, so it's really nice to be treated like a lady by him. Story 19. When we had our first date, it was actually our first time seeing each other in person. He met me outside of my office right when my shift ended and literally ran across the street to me with the biggest, brightest smile. He took me in his arms and hugged me so hard that my feet dangled in midair. And in the sweetest and most excited voice, he said, "It's so nice to finally meet you." 10 seconds in, and I was cooked. I loved that he never tried to play it cool or aloof. He never hid that he was happy to see me. He literally swept me off my feet. That was 3 years ago. We're getting married in October. Story 20. Our first date, he took me camping to a secret cabin he had built in the woods, right on the edge of a lake. We went fishing. He cooked me the best dinner I've ever had with foraged things he collected while we were mushroom picking. Then he told me he heated up the tub so I could have a bath before bed if I wanted. He was such a gentleman the whole trip. We spent 3 days out there and it was amazing. We got back to the dock and unloaded the boat of all our stuff. Then he put the boat back to the bushes and we headed home. He had grabbed a poster off one of the trees. I picked it up and it said, "Yellow boat missing from boat launch. Please let us know if you see it," with a phone number and the names of every family member. It was not his boat. We laughed our asses off. Story 21. The first time my now ex, but we were married for 16 years and have kids together and I don't regret it. Wife visited my apartment. My one cat, that was notorious for disappearing when anybody came over, even the pet sitter who he knew well and liked, promptly jumped on her lap and started purring at her. She had no idea what to do with cats at the time and said so, but just went with it and they became friends right away. If he thought she was a keeper, who was I to argue with him? Story 22. We met at a bar late afternoon on Halloween. We were both late, so that started off some ice-breaking banter. We sat outside and talked for hours. At some point, we start talking about food, and I say something along the lines of, "Nachos is the perfect food." He stops, asks me to wait a minute, walks up, and I didn't know this at the time, leaves the bar to go across the street to the taqueria and come back with nachos for us to share. He was gone for over 10 min, and I didn't think he ghosted me, probably BC. He left his jacket, etc. But when he came back and opened the takeout container to reveal nachos, my jaw dropped, and I was speechless. Halloween 2025 will be our 10-year anniversary. Side note, we also are the only other person in our respective lives who like horror, which makes our anniversary being Halloween wonderfully serendipitous. Story 23. My wife and I got married after 3 months. That was 17 years ago. We still have a strong, loving, passionate relationship. She is my best friend. Our first date was also the first time we met in person. She originally saw me performing music at a club and then got to know my friends first. Apparently, they all had good things to say about me. She started messaging me on MySpace, and then we started talking on the phone. Then, one evening, we went out to the club together. It was a blast. Then we went to a friend of mine's birthday party. She thought it was cool that I was totally willing to let her meet all my homies, even though she already knew them. Then we went to a suite at the Warwick and made love until the sun came up. That was it. We were both hooked. We have been inseparable since. Story 24. Was broken up about 2 months prior and decided to have a party and invite someone over that I recently went on a date with. One of those we both didn't expect relationships longevity, around 1-2 a.m. There are some people still around, but I invited this person to my room. They were sitting on my bed when I said, "Do you want to see my yo-yo?" I literally picked up my light-up yo-yo and started yo-yoing. Showed how to walk the dog, around the world, grandfather clock, and random moves I put together. 2.5 years later, still strong and literally the happiest and healthiest relationship I've witnessed. Not to gloat, but we don't fight. We sometimes argue, and those get resolved with de-escalation on both sides and coming together to have conversations once there's opportunity for cool down. I'm proud of us. Edit. Me doing so was the moment for them, as I am told. Story 25. We weren't even on a date, really. We were having a long, intense conversation and ignoring the rest of the world at a party for the college newspaper people. A girl came up and asked him if he would walk her home. We were on the south side of Chicago, and it was pretty late in the evening. He said, "Give me a few minutes and then sure." She walked off. He looked at me and sighed. "I'd rather not," he said. And I understood. It was the right thing to do. He absolutely could not let her walk home alone. We were all broke students. It was really a moment when I thought, this guy, he's cute, he's smart, he's a really decent, kind, and interesting person. He is actually friends with girls who trust him. This is my guy. We have been married 36 years. Story 26. Nothing he said or did partially. We both were bored and matched on Tinder. He asked me if I was free that night. We met for rock climbing and pizza. Was only supposed to be from 4 p.m. till like 6 p.m. We shut down the pizza joint and they had to ask us to leave at about midnight. We just sat and talked for hours about everything. We didn't even kiss goodbye, we just hugged, I think. I remember sitting in my car thinking this will be the last first date of my life. And I was right. 3 years later, engaged and planning a life together. We shortly got COVID after that date and quarantined together for 2 weeks in a cabin. I knew right away I loved him, but those 2 weeks of sickness and nonstop together really reaffirmed it to me. Story 27. The moment I opened my door, his face lit up like I had made his day just by existing. He wasn't my date yet. He had just come to fix my broken air conditioner in the middle of summer, so I was probably looking at him with the same expression. He needed my number to call me from the roof so I could turn the AC on and off. So a few days later, I texted him some beast question about the part he replaced. He got the hint and called me right away, and our first phone call lasted 2 hours. The way he lit up for me at probably one of my least attractive moments, sweaty, no makeup, messy hair, and old workout clothes, just stuck in my mind. The easy conversation and beefy bod didn't hurt either. Story 28. She was reluctant to date me. She agreed to go out to dinner with me only if it was in a group of other people from class. There were 4 of us. One dropped out because she had something to do. The other was running about 30 minutes late because she had to pick up her kid. The 2 of us decided to sit at the bar and talk until the other person got there. About 20 minutes in, she said she hoped the other girl didn't show. I was thinking the same thing. The other girl did eventually show, but we both remembered that. After the date, we got ice cream, and I fingered her, so that was pretty cool. 10 years later, we're still going strong. Story 29. As we were driving to dinner, a car swerved into our lane, causing him to have to brake hard. He automatically put his arm out over me. It was something my mother always did. To me, it symbolized an unthinking care and thoughtfulness. We will be married 30 years this month, and he is truly thoughtful, empathetic, and caring. I told him he is simply a good man. That is high praise to me. Nothing better than a genuinely good person. Story 30. Was before our first date, so I don't know if this counts. We met in college and we had a group project together, which was how we met. She was texting me, asking me things, and found out that I commuted 40 minutes to school. She lived on campus. She goes something like, "Oh my God, so you have to get together for the group project after class and then drive 40 minutes home? That really must suck." It didn't bother me since I was used to it, but the fact that it was the first time that someone other than family or my best friend actually seemed to give a shit about me, especially someone of the opposite sex, pretty much blew my mind. I thought she was so sweet because of that. Story 31. After he finished info dumping about cars to me, he asked what my special interests are. We're both autistic. And when he got me rambling about Spider-Man, he asked me questions to keep me going, even though he clearly had no idea what the fuck I was talking about. The fondness in his expression when he asked me who my favorite Spider-Man was and I went on a 15-minute rant about queer transcoding in the Spider-Verse movies and how important it is to people who are queer and trans, even if it's not outright stated in canon. When I finally realized how long I'd been talking but didn't feel the need to apologize or shut myself down because he was actively interested in listening to me. That's when I realized we needed to go on another date. Story 32. I did not marry this young lady, but she made an impression. We went to several places together by car. On the entire date, everywhere we went, when we got out of the car, I would open her car door, and when we returned to the car, I would open and close her car door. Before I could get to the other side and open my door for myself, she would reach over to the driver's side door from the inside and push my door open for me. I still haven't forgotten her for that very reason. She clearly communicated to me that she was ready to serve her mate as much or more than he was willing to serve her. I knew immediately that I was going to sear her again. Story 33. She forgot about our first date. I texted her as I was leaving, and she replied in a very open, honest fashion that she had forgotten because she was busy cleaning her bathroom. No kidding. She forgot about our date because she was scrubbing a toilet. But instead of asking to reschedule or even just postponing until later in the day, she asked for an additional 15 minutes to get herself together. Sure enough, she showed up with her hair up and a Foo Fighters t-shirt on, looking as casual as a Sunday afternoon. It was a wonderful date, but I had already resolved to see her again. I was so impressed at her casual confidence in coming straight from the bathroom floor and the complete lack of pretension. Story 34. On the first date, which I was petrified for, we met for what we thought would be a quick drink, and that's it. We ended up playing Trivial Pursuit and Scrabble in the pub for 5 hours. She kicked my arse at Scrabble. On, I think, the third, we got incredibly drunk and walked back. She stopped in a cut-through, and we looked at the stars. I pulled out the most awkward impression of an astronomer, to which she laughed. Then we kissed. I was surprised, as I thought I'd completely blown it with that. We were together for 7 years, and while not together now, remain very close, and there is a deep affection for each other. Story 35. This was our very first date, and I remember telling him from the beginning over text that I have epilepsy, seizures, but they're controlled. Unfortunately, on the date I had a tonic-clonic seizure and had to be taken by ambulance to the emergency room. He followed in his car with all my belongings and stayed with me, giving them as much information as he could with what I had given him, held my hand when they had to administer medication and take blood, and wiped away my tears when I didn't know what was going on. He met my mom that night. We've been dating 5 years this upcoming August, and I love him more every day. Story 36. Met him on a dating app during a time in my life that I wasn't looking for anything serious. We went to a local spot, got pretty drunk, and he ended up staying over. Before he left the next morning, he was making plans for when we could hang out again next. He did this after every date. Before he would leave, we would run through our calendars and plan ahead the next time we could hang out. That might not sound like much, but it was such a massive reassurance during a period of my life that was so up in the air. That was almost 5 years ago, and we're currently planning our wedding. Story 37. My most recent first date lasted 4 days. We went out to get a couple beers and vibed perfectly well. We went home and watched the Animatrix and held hands. After that, stuff happened, and since she lives out of town, of course, I let her stay at my place. The next day, I asked her to stay again. We met on a Sunday. This went on till Wednesday. I just couldn't let her go. She came back on Sunday and left again on Thursday. Long story short, within 2 multi-day dates, I now have a new girlfriend. Haha. Story 38. I wasn't sure I even wanted to meet him. But then during our first call, he blurted out that he's always wanted to put on hip waders and visit a cranberry bog. It was so out of left field, so random and odd that I said yes to a date. Our first date there was instant chemistry, so it took off from there. Story 39. Not necessarily a date. I came over after I got off work one night for a smoke session to most likely bone. It was our first time hanging out. We had been texting for a few weeks, but we got caught up talking, and I kept making him laugh. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't expect me to be that funny. And then when he started making me laugh back, and I mean belly laugh harder than I had in years, I knew I was going to fall in love. We moved into our first place together this year. Story 40. This is wild, but follow me. At the time, we were still in the talking stage. I needed to go to the hospital for something minor and was chatting with him by a fluke. He took me to the hospital, waited with me, and on the way out said as a joke something to the effect of, "Want to go get coffee, or is this how we will remember our first date?" I can't explain why, but it was so charming and funny. We ended up having a second first date, and the hospital incident is just a funny story. But still, that really stuck with me. Story 41. We went out at 7 p.m. to have a couple little drinks and snacks by a campfire and ended up talking until dawn. My roommate texted me and called me and had my friends texting and calling because they thought I got murdered. I forgot my phone even existed all night. It died because it was on roaming, and when the sun came up, we were like, "Wait, what day is it?" He also knew all of the constellations and their myths. We got married and have kids now. I get the very same time doesn't exist feeling every day now. Story 42. We had worked together for a year, and he waited until we were on a real date to tell me I was even more naturally beautiful than he imagined. "You really are just naturally beautiful, aren't you?" he said, looking at me in his passenger seat. It wasn't creepy at all and made me feel so proud. I want to feel like that all the time. Story 43. I bought tickets to our bull riding competition, which sell out in seconds online, and whoops. He shows up so nicely dressed in slacks and a button-up expecting an indoor arena. It was an outdoor event and an absolute downpour that turned the venue into a mud pit with strong wind gusts. I was soaked through my 2 layers, so his clothes were a mess, but I offered to do his laundry at my house nearby so he wouldn't have to drive home so soaked. And I got to see him shirtless. We've been together ever since. Story 44. After a bunch of failed online dates, we met. As a woman, I had to be on guard for the guys who just wanted sex. We met up on a Wednesday. We talked for hours, closed the bar, he walked me to my car, and we kissed. I was waiting for the invite back to his place. But nope. We left. He texted me later to make sure I got home okay, and that was it. Been together 11 years. Married 8. We both think we found our soulmates. Story 45. I was 24 and still a virgin, which they were really receptive of. We went on a date, and then they offered for me to come crash at their place. Coincidentally, they had just gone and gotten waxed and liked to sleep naked. So I asked, "Hey, were you wanting to have sex tonight?" We tried, and I was nervous and didn't get very far. I apologized, and they told, "It's not a big deal. There will be more opportunities." We don't date anymore. We still hook up, and she's one of my best and closest friends. Story 46. Got a flat tire on the way to meet him at a restaurant. Live about 30 mins outside town. Texted him what happened and was so worried he was going to think I was making up some bonkers excuse to get out of the date. He insisted on driving out to change the tire. As I watched him changing my tire at lightning speed, I was so glad my date was a heavy-duty mechanic and not a doctor or lawyer. I knew as soon as he insisted on coming to help that I wanted another date. Story 47. He came up to me, introduced himself, and told me he'd marry me one day. Apparently, he'd had a premonition on the way to the pub that he would meet his wife. No idea who she was. Honestly, I thought he was mental, but he was just so confident about it. Not cocky, just sure that he was right. We'll be together for 18 years this year, and he's still my favorite person. We laugh daily, and he's my biggest cheerleader. Story 48. Was a teaching golf pro 33 years ago. She was the first and only student I ever went on a date. She wore a gold shirt that made her eyes explode with colors. I must have been somewhat entertaining, as she would touch my arm throughout our time at the sports bar. Between those phenomenal eyes and her reassuring arm touches, we saw each other again 2 days later. It's been 31 years of wedding bliss, and I still look back on that first evening as the most magical of nights. Story 49. I used to think this kind of thing was dorky. but he wanted to drive me to my car even though it wasn't far at all. Then, when he dropped me off, he asked if he could kiss me. I'd literally never been asked that before. I was 35, and it floored me how endearing it was in the moment. He is still just as sweet and considerate. We are 2 years strong and expecting our first baby. I really, really love this man. Story 50. He played chess with me. He beat me, which piqued my interest since I am a good chess player. He brought a Billie Holiday record and a bottle of bourbon to our chess game, and he asked all kinds of interesting questions of me. He later told me he had to focus hard on the game instead of on my legs because he knew that if he could beat me, I would want to play chess with him again. He was right. We have been happily married for many years now. Story 51. We were having pretty normal small talks about school, work, hobbies, etc. while having lunch on our first date. And after eating about half her food, she says, "Sigh, I'm tired of eating. Life is hard." I couldn't help but laugh. It's like she let her guard down and let her true self peek out a little bit. I teased her about that line the rest of the date, and we got a lot more comfortable with each other. Almost 5 years later, we're still together. Edit. Grammar. Story 52. We went on a walk in the middle of winter in Wisconsin, and we both decided to trudge through a park with about 6 to 8 inches of nice fluffy snow. We sat on a bench by a river as it was snowing for a long time and got to know each other. The fact that we both loved the cold and didn't mind wading through snow just because I knew we had something. 5 years later, and we still go on snowy walks every time we get snowfall. Story 53. We'd been very flirty friends for a while, same grad program, and finally went out to dinner on what I thought was a date, but wasn't 100% sure. It was a cute little Italian restaurant, very romantic, and the conversation just flowed. There was a live musician going around to each of the tables asking for requests, and before he gets to our table, my date blurts, "I should ask him to play Black Hole Sun." I about died laughing. We've been married 13 years. Story 54. We went to Chipotle on our first date, my idea in case I wanted to split. We had known one another for 2 seconds. He pointed at the accent wall, sheets of plywood with different sized drilled holes. He asked, "Which one of these do you think my dick would fit in?" Without missing a beat, I pointed at the smallest hole. He nodded solemnly. We proceeded to talk for 4 hours. Lots of laughs. Very genuine, honest man, but he was gratefully lying about that. Story 55. We were walking through a zoo. She seemed very timid and shy the entire date. There was also a language barrier as she was just learning my language and was also bad at English. At the end, though, we sat down for a snack and started a conversation. Suddenly, she had this sly smile and just kept on talking and talking. She had lost the fear of making a mistake and revealed her true, interesting self to me. Her beautiful laugh won me over. Story 56. She shook my hand and said I could sleep on the couch. Never happened to me before, and I felt that there was something different about this girl than all the others I'd dated before. Got her number and promised to call her soon thereafter. Waited 2 weeks, asked her to go with me to see the Grateful Dead on Nye. Couldn't score the ticks, but I did score an 8-ball of Coke. We'll be married 40 years this August. Story 57. Not a date technically. He was my friend who was helping me move. We just got done emptying all of the moving boxes into my storage unit from a dolly. I thought to myself, I wish I could sit on the dolly and he would push me around, but that would be stupid of me to ask. But right then he asked, "Can I please push you on the dolly?" I was in love. Story 58. It wasn't a date, but my now BF, when we had our first hangout as friends, he picked me up in a non-convertible Miata, brought me a sandwich, and had a 6-pack. We went down to the beach and watched some sailboat racing. I thought, this guy gets it, and we've been hanging out for the past 2 years. He still makes me sandwiches, and now he lets me drive the Miata in the summer. Story 59. Well, wasn't a date, but met my BF, and we both planned on it being a one-night stand kind of thing. The next day, he texted me a link to snore strips and said he was going to bring them next time Lowell. Made me realize he was interested in seeing me again, and had a good sense of humor. Otherwise, I most likely wouldn't have reached out again. Story 60. We had met on an online dating app and met 3 weeks later. I had my doubts as she was a highly qualified doctor from a very prestigious university and 10 years younger than me. At the end of our first date, she asked for and painstakingly cleaned them for me. We got married 6 months later and are now in our 5th year of marriage, and it's getting better with age. Story 61. He bought me movie tickets to a movie I really wanted to watch without me asking. I had mentioned I wanted to watch it, and the next time we hung out, we seen the movie. Also confirmed when he used words like pretty and gorgeous, rather than hot or whatever. It wasn't coming off too strong like calling me beautiful on the first date, but made me feel special rather than a sex object. Story 62. The first time I ever met him, I had just gotten my wisdom teeth out, and one of my wounds got infected, so I had a puffy cheek. That wasn't a date, but then he asked me in our first date, and he remembered what I was wearing and told me I looked cute, even with my swollen face. Lol. 2 years later, we're going strong. Story 63. We were 15, and she told me that she wants to touch lava really quick to see how hot it is. Life happened, and we moved apart. At 26, 11 years later, we reconnected. I randomly have an igneous rock, dried lava, and I told her to touch it before telling her what it was. It's pretty dorky, but we have 2 kids and a dog now, and things are going well. Story 64. He asked me about my hobbies, and I said I like to journal, and I said, never anything good, though. And he goes, I'll give you something good to write about, grabbed my face, and kissed me so passionately. 18-year-old me went nuts for that shit. We had an on-off relationship for the next 6 years. He's still one of the most interesting people I've ever known. Story 65. One time my date shared a personal story that showed vulnerability and authenticity. It made me feel a deeper connection with them, and I appreciated their willingness to open up. Their honesty and genuine nature made me excited about the possibility of getting to know them better, so I definitely wanted to go on another date with them. Story 66. He was a border patrol officer. Really good-looking guy. Had a tiny little chip in his front tooth. So tiny. Cute. He had me go with him to purchase a brand new Hummer on one of our dates. He just decided to buy it on a whim. Not only was he so damn adorable and had that hot uniform, I really liked him a lot. I wish it had worked out. Story 67. He took me out for Mexican food and a zombie movie. When I asked him why, he said if we didn't click, at least he had a good meal and got to see a movie he liked. I found his honesty refreshing. Plus, I love Mexican food and zombie movies. He didn't know that, though, and we're still watching movies and eating great food together 20 years later. Story 68. He took me to a shooting range and taught me how to shoot a gun with incredible patience and detail and concern for safety. He asked, now before you hold the gun, do you have any questions, because we can take as long as you want? He still helps me with anything with the same level of attention and care, no matter how big or small. Story 69. I was meeting her at a public lake. I pulled up and she was bent over into her car trunk grabbing towels. She has a lovely backside. She turned and we got eyes, and my breath caught in my chest. Those eyes met with the warmest smile I've ever seen. I never believed in love at first sight till that moment. 6 years later, and that smile still takes my breath. Story 70. This relationship didn't work out long term, but our first date ended up being 18 hours. Met for an evening date that turned into me staying the night and continuing to hang out the next day. The connection was so natural. I was comfortable right away. We dated for 3 months. This was years ago. But fast forward to today, we're good friends. Story 71. We talked about everything to music, travel, religious cults, lol, and spent almost 3 hours at a taco shop just talking. He was also my first date since my ex and I didn't feel nervous or anything. I was so calm and felt less anxious and safe around him. We've been together for about 10 months now, and it's been amazing. Story 72. On our first date with my now husband, a homeless man came to the outdoor smokers area to look for butts. He wasn't asking anyone for cigarettes. He was just going over the leftover ashtrays. Hubs, unprompted, gave him a few of his cigarettes with no hesitation, gave the guy a bit of dignity, and was lovely to see how grateful he was. Story 73. Our second date was off to a rough start. Was fully convinced I wasn't going to talk to him anymore. Ended the night with us sitting on a bench outside my workplace and us talking when a cockroach came running fast as hell over some rocks, and he said, "He's four-wheeling that bitch." Never genuinely laughed so hard in my life. Been together 2 years this fall. Story 74. We were both chewing gum and looking for a trash can to toss it in. We must have spotted one at the same time. We turned to each other and stuck our hands out to collect and toss the other's chewed-up gum. Sounds gross, but it was after a few months of dating exclusively. One of my favorite moments, LOL. Story 75. She listened when I talked and talked while I listened. Doesn't sound like much, but I hate dates that say very little or monopolize the conversation. She laughed a lot. At my jokes and at other things she found amusing. She had an optimistic attitude. I love people that love life and are happy to be living it. Story 76. Bible Belt circa 1992 first date. Me. If you're looking for a goody-goody church boy, I'm not your guy. Her. Oh, hell yeah. Me. Will you marry me? I didn't really ask her to marry me on our first date, but I did 3 years later. Going on 29 years later, I still can't believe how great we are together. Story 77. I'm a historian, and I was talking about something that happened in the area we were walking, though, as it was linked to his general political outlook, and I mentioned a memorial nearby. I realized I was too deep to back out and not be an utter loser. He said, "Let's go see it then." Sadly, no second date happened. Story 78. I'm not great at expressing emotions, but they realized I express my emotions through whatever song, movie, or book I am talking about. They noticed patterns quickly and knew how I felt. I felt understood for the first time. Unfortunately, it didn't last, and the last song we shared was Oceans by Seafret. Maybe in the next life. Story 79. She fist-pumped the air, cheered, and hugged me. Why? She'd asked me what I thought of the Twilight series, and I simply told her that it's a load of badly written, pretentious, artistically devoid shit, full of insufferable, unlikable characters that all deserve to drown in a quagmire of their own hormonally charged excretions. Thank you all for watching. Watch even more great stories on my channel.